Good evening, everyone. My name is Mario Ebanks, and I welcome you to the second show of Let's Talk Policy with Mario. I am the candidate for West Bay West in the April 14th elections, and I welcome all of you for this hour of discussion. The purpose of this show is to discuss policy issues, to look at my manifesto, but deal with policy. Far too often in our election campaigns, we talk about everything else other than policy. I have committed to talk about policy, solutions, and ideas, and a better vision for these islands. And so, as the best choice candidate for West Bay West, I welcome you here this evening to Let's Talk Policy with Mario. I am joined again this evening with two wonderful West Bayers, Caymanians, young professionals, James Whitaker and Catherine Wells. They will be introduced a bit later on, but they are Caymanian subject matter experts. And both of them are interested in building a better and stronger Cayman Islands, regardless of political party or political affiliation. This is about the country, not about the party. But before we start this evening, our discussions on policy, I need to just set the record straight preliminary on a couple of items of a political nature. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Holy Week and a time to reflect on the passion of our Christ, the one who died on the cross, rose 3 days later for our sins. However, yesterday morning, my opponent went to church, he says anyway, went to church for a prayer meeting at 7 o'clock in the morning yesterday. Then he came to Radio Cayman at 9 a.m. and started to spit razors. He came here with his lies about me and others, telling stories about people stealing and all sorts of other lies, pure lies, a trademark, it seems. My opponent made threats. He continued his trademark of spreading hate, division, inciting strife, and spewing venom. And sadly, that's all he knows how to do. In my opinion, he's a coward. He's been a no-show on 2 debates with me. First, the Rooster Radio debate, and secondly, the Chamber of Commerce debate that has been going on since 1988. He missed both of those this year. But he prefers to go into the neighborhoods and people's homes or come to the radio to take coward blows at me and tell lies. I had planned to reply to him fully tonight, even though this is Holy Week. But in full respect to my panelists and to you, the listening public, I will not do so tonight. Also, last night I went to a prayer service for candidates that was held at the Bosun Bay Presbyterian Church. He did not attend that either. And as a result of that service, my God told me not to reply to him tonight. So I will obey. I will obey that. But I will do so after Easter. You know, my friends, listeners, citizens, voters, I had really intended to ask my opponent about his Ritz-Carlton condominium. I was also going to ask him a few questions about the First Cayman Bank disaster, where he was a director. I was also going to ask him tonight about the letter of October 2004 that he wrote to a big developer. But I'll leave all those until after Easter. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, and West Bay West voters, just please ignore his continued lies and hate speech. I repeat, hate speech. I pray for those good people in the neighborhood where he is going to be going tonight for a public meeting to spread more hate and lies. I hope that they chase him home tonight with his dress flying. I have relied on a number of scriptures in this campaign, and one of those scriptures is Isaiah 40:31. And I liken that scripture because it talks about the eagle. And this little reading is something that I have been holding dear for a long time, and I want to share it with you. before we get discussing real policy issues. The eagle does not fight the snake on the ground. It picks the snake up into the sky and changes the battleground, and then it releases the snake into the sky. The snake has no stamina, no power, and no balance in the air. It is useless, weak, and vulnerable, unlike on the ground where it is powerful, wise, and deadly. So take your flight into the spiritual realm by praying, and when you are in the spiritual realm, God takes over your battles. So don't fight the enemy in his comfort zone. Change the battleground like the eagle, and let God take charge through earnest prayer, and you'll be assured of a clean victory. In this election, I have started and I will finish like the eagle, and I will not go into the dirt and the mud where the snakes reside. So this discussion show, ladies and gentlemen, demonstrates my commitment, the commitment of me, my family, and my wonderful election committee to show the importance of reaching out and embracing Caymanian talent wherever it exists. And in this room tonight, there are two dynamic, talented Caymanians who are joining me. And we have a rich and diverse talent pool in these islands, and I'm committed, when elected, to reach out and bring good people all around us so we can really make meaningful change in these islands. In my manifesto, there are two areas that we're going to be dealing with tonight, and I just want to just preface that before we get into the discussion by the expert panelists on this show. The first area is local commerce and industry. And in my manifesto, the manifesto of Mario E. Ebanks for West Bay West, is local commerce and industry. Protect small businesses and review the cost of doing business. Promote green technology and facilitate the renewable energy industry. Provide financial incubation, best practices, and resilience for small businesses. Reduce red tape and frustration for small businesses by establishing industry or sectoral liaisons within key government departments. Provide access via the Cayman Islands Development Bank and others to financing for low capital and micro or cottage industries, and implement clear guidelines and assistance through the Department of Commerce and Investment. And the other area of my manifesto that relates to our discussion tonight is to do with the quality of life, cost of living. And in that section, we talk about appointing a think tank to examine the issue of the cost of electricity generation, the cost of existing fuels, the options for energy to reduce the CUC residential and commercial electricity bills, urgently exploring and support the opportunities and benefits of renewable energy as a blended strategy for cost reduction to the consumer. Then we talk about activating the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee to facilitate an urgent review and report on the minimum wage. And there's other suggestions and recommendations as well in that section of our manifesto, but those are the highlights. And so it is my pleasure now to introduce the first panelist that will speak this evening, and that's James Whitaker. James Whitaker is a Caymanian by birth with degrees in banking, accounting, and international finance. He is the president of the Cayman Renewable Energy Association, chairman of the Caribbean Transitional Energy Conference, and member of the Cayman Energy Policy Council. He's a co-creator of the Carbon Offsets Program, developer of Project Green School, as well as the founder of Green Tech Energy, the Cayman Islands' largest clean energy provider, with projects and operations around the Caribbean. James also has an extensive background in finance, having spent 19 years working in Cayman, Bermuda, and New York in various management and executive roles. His last, prior to entering the renewable energy sector, was a senior regulator with the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, or CIMA, holding the post of Deputy Head of Investments Division, having supervisory responsibility for the world's largest group of hedge funds. James comes to us as a Caymanian with a sterling track record, very well qualified, very equipped, and very passionate for his work, And so, James, welcome. The floor is yours, and please help us understand the issue that you are very passionate about.
Well, thank you, Mario, for the opportunity to discuss the national energy policy once again. As you mentioned, it's something that I'm certainly very passionate about. Some people think it's because I'm in the industry, and obviously that's true. I never sort of hide that, but the truth is I was embracing renewable energy way back in 2010 when I built my first house many years before I ever got into the industry. So I've been a long advocate of renewables from the time Cayman really started this pursuit many years ago. The National Energy Policy is a very, very important document. It is something that is going to help the cost of living for all people in the Cayman Islands. It is something that is going to drive positive economic growth. It is something that's going to drive jobs and education for Caymanians. It is also something that is going to benefit our environment in many ways and our health in many ways. And so it's a very, very important document. It is not a document to be taken lightly. It took 4 years, 50 plus people, tens of thousands of dollars, a committee that put this forth to our parliament, and our parliament voted unanimously for this. So this is a very important central document. And the big issue today is that this document is not being implemented. Every country that you see that is adopting renewable energy at any meaningful pace, they have two fundamental things. They have good policy and they have good regulation. And you need both. You can't have one without the other. Now, for many years, we had neither. And so, having pushed a few years ago, we got the National Energy Policy passed here in Cayman almost 5 years ago, back in 2017. And to be quite frank with you, Cayman has one of the best energy policies, in my opinion at least, in the entire Caribbean. What we lack now is the regulation behind that. And it is the regulation that is stymieing progress. Now, I know the regulator disputes that, but I don't think the numbers can be in dispute. In 12 years of pursuing renewable energy, the Cayman Islands has managed 2.5% renewable energy. Countries that have started after us, islands that have started after us, are 30 and 40% today. Far, far ahead of us, right? And though that is the reality, no matter what anybody tells you. One of the key factors for renewable energy that is important to Cayman is its ability to create jobs. Yes, it lowers the cost of living because it allows you to lower your energy cost over time, but it is a significant job creator. In fact, in North America, solar energy is the fastest growing job sector of any sector in the US. It is one of the fastest growing in the world. It could be easily the fastest growing job sector in the Cayman Islands. Easily.
Agreed.
In this time of COVID, where so many people in tourism are unemployed, this should be one of those industries that we are leaning on, that we are leaning into, that we are doubling down on. Instead, what you've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is that there are job losses in the industry instead of job growth. And that is a direct reflection of the regulators' policies, the regulators' untimely decision making. And really, people ask me all the time, what is the issue? The issue is that the regulator themselves, the management of the regulators, they have a philosophical difference with the national energy policy. And so I've said to many people, including the government, how can people who have a philosophical difference to the national energy policy be implementing the national energy policy? You're not going to get it. And one of these philosophical differences comes down to the consumer's right, the average Caymanian's right to put solar on their roofs. They want to double down on large commercial, giving utility scale solar, which we support as well, because the national energy policy calls for both of those things. But you do have a regulator who will tell you, well, certainly they will tell me in private. I can't really get them to admit it in public, but they will tell me in private that why would we support residential rooftop solar when we can have utility scale solar for cheaper? Negating the fact that the job creation, the net economic benefits to the country, the environmental benefits from using existing spaces, rooftops and parking lots instead of cutting down natural land, all of these other benefits that they discount because they're focused purely on this myopic price. But even more important than that, they don't get to make that choice. You are not an elected official. You are not a policymaker. When I worked for SEMA and I was the deputy head of SEMA, I couldn't expect that the elected officials would pass regulations in Parliament, pass policy in Parliament, and it lands on my desk, and I get to pick and choose which ones I want to implement or not. I'm not a policymaker. If you want to be a policymaker, run in a manifesto, get elected, and create a new policy for yourself. But you shouldn't be allowed to nitpick policy that's already there, and that's really what's happening.
But so the minister of that's responsible for this, for the off-reg, is who? Just remind us of who that is.
It would be Joey Hugh from CPI.
Right. And so if the national energy policy is established by Parliament and is a government policy, how can technocrats say that they don't agree with it or don't support it or don't try to implement it?
Well, again, what they say in private and what they say in public tends to be two different things, which is part of my frustration. I'd love to have a debate if they would just be honest and say, we do not believe that Caymanians should be able to have solar on their homes. Because that's what they've said, but they don't really say that publicly, and they don't really say that to the government, and they don't really say that externally. They simply say that internally, and they've said it to my face, and they've said it in writing, so they certainly can't deny it to me, because I can prove that that is their position that they've held. So I think part of the challenge is that they haven't doubled down on this position. They've said this position privately, and their actions show that that's what they're doing, right? They're killing these consumer renewable energy programs, but they're not admitting why they're doing it. They're doing it because they have a philosophical difference to it, even though the national energy policy specifically requires them to do it.
The regulation of carbon utilities companies, CUC, also comes on the off-reg, right?
Does, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right. So is there a subsidy that government provides for the community solar program or not?
So there is a subsidy related to the core program. So the core program is very simply the program that the average Caymanian has access to put solar energy on their homes. They have another program called DER. That is only economically viable for large commercial users. So for the average Caymanian, despite many of Off-Reg's press releases saying otherwise, the average Caymanian cannot access that program in any economically viable way. So the core program is the only program that Caymanians have that they can access renewable energy. That program is subsidized, and it has been subsidized from its inception. But that subsidy continues to fall over time and will continue to fall over time until there's no subsidy at all. And the reason you do that is to keep incentivizing the adoption of solar, keep pushing down the subsidy, and you're going to do that based on the fact that the cost of solar falls over time. So when I did my first house back in 2010, you were paying $5 or $6 a watt for solar. That system that I put on that house was $60,000. Today you can buy that same system for $20,000. So the costs have dropped dramatically, and so the rates should fall dramatically as well. And so what you realize is that over time, based on CREA's calculations, over the next 5 years, even the smallest solar systems going on homes would be unsubsidized. But again, that has to be a process. And so what Off-Reg is doing now is they're dropping the rates off of a cliff and basically saying we don't want any more subsidies magically in 2021, even though for 10 years, exactly what I'm advocating for is exactly what they've done for an entire decade. It's Off-Reg that has changed this position all of a sudden now. And so what you find now is that the end result is that the average homeowner does not have access to solar anymore, right? It's going to become a commercial-only industry. So for the big companies and for utilities like CUC in building solar farms, that's going to be the focus from Off-Reg's philosophical perspective. The problem with that, of course, as I said, it's a violation of the national energy policy.
So like apartment buildings or condominiums who want to have solar, that is not allowed unless it's a big project that can qualify for the DER program?
As we sit here today, no residential customer in the Cayman Islands can have solar on your house no matter how much money you have. You are regulatory legally barred from doing so, as we sit here today. And that is a result of the fact that Off-Reg has mismanaged the capacity, i.e. the ability to add solar to the grid. They've had an infusion study now for 4 or 5 years, and they were supposed to have upgraded the grid 2 years ago. That's not happening for 2 years now. And so they've run out of capacity through their own incompetence. On top of that, as I said, the way that they have manage the rates, they don't have a proper rate setting methodology. So the other way that they're killing the program is to the fact that it's, instead of constantly bringing it down roughly by an average of 2 cents every year with the falling cost of solar, they basically dropped it by 50% off a cliff, right? And so again, because I happen to know that they have a philosophical difference with regards to rooftop solar for homes. This is the manifestation of that philosophy, right? But again, my point and the point of Korea is these gentlemen are violating the national energy policy. The national energy policy, half of it speaks to consumer renewables. And so you mentioned community solar. This falls in the other bucket of new programs that we've tried to push over the years. So we didn't want to just improve core and embrace DER, but you need other programs that actually cater to the entire range of the consumer base. It's 31,000 electricity consumers in Cayman. And so we've tried to institute things like community solar. We've tried to advocate for things like financing. All of these things opens up renewable energy to the average person. And the average person will tell you things like, well, solar is too expensive. One of the big challenges with solar is the upfront costs. But actually, solar in Cayman is the same price as in the United States. A far bigger market. We have the highest cost of living and some of the highest costs of doing business anywhere in the world. And our solar costs are equivalent. You can check the NREL 2020 reports. Our costs in Cayman are equivalent to the United States. So it's not that it's too expensive. Financing, a simple regulatory change could open up financing. I would provide the financing for all of my customers who wanted the financing. And so would the other solar providers if OFREG would make CUC pay the financing entity instead of the customer. If we have that agreement, what does that do? Well, if they're just going to give the customer the credit and I've paid for the system, then I have to assess the credit worthiness of that customer. You effectively have to now become a bank. But if CUC paid me or the bank or whoever is doing the financing directly, and me and the customer have an agreement where I say, hey, here's a $20,000 solar system. You can pay the $20,000 and you can get your $400 a month, or you can pay zero and we'll split the $400 and I'll take two and you take two. But that is illegal. But a simple regulatory change would open up all of these options. And so there are answers to these issues, right? There's answers to access. There's answers for consumers having renewables. But unfortunately, you're not going to get that unless you implement the national energy policy. And the national energy policy isn't going to be implemented because you have a regulator that has philosophical differences with the national energy policy.
You mentioned also about jobs. How many people are employed today in your industry, the solar industry, renewable energy industry?
So let me rewind it back to the end of 2019, because in addition to COVID in 2020, OFREG stopped the solar program and failed to make a decision about providing capacity for 1 year. So basically for all of 2020, there was almost no solar done in Cayman because of OFREG's untimely decision making. At the end of 2019, you had about somewhere between 3 and 4 dozen, somewhere around 40 people fully employed in this sector directly. Now that supports a couple hundred people indirectly, structural engineers, contractors, electricians, those sorts of things. So you had about 40 people or so directly employed in what has been a volatile industry because of how it's been regulated, right? Green Tech is one of the few companies that have taken the risks of the volatility, but a lot of the other guys won't take the risk. They won't hire people because they don't know from year to year what decisions OFREG is going to make, what rates are there going to be, how much capacity is there going to be. So there's a lot of uncertainty with the industry. One thing that helps us is, as a company, is that we also do work outside of Cayman, so that helps to balance out some of the volatility. But the reality is, as far as the job creations is concerned, rooftop solar, and this is important to understand because, again, OFREG pushes for utility scale solar, which, again, we support in addition to, right? For the people employed in the renewable energy sector for rooftop solar in a very volatile industry, we got a 5 megawatt solar farm up in Bodden Town. How many full-time, long-term employees? 0.
So who services that farm?
They've subcontracted it out to a local provider who's already an existing company with an existing employee that services it. So my point is, with utility scale solar, what you see is a lot of short-term jobs to build it. But once it's actually built, there's only 1 or 2 people that actually maintain that system, right? Whereas rooftop solar, you've got dozens and dozens of people. And so there's a reason why every country in the world, if you go to the United States, they promote residential, commercial, and utility scale because they understand that they provide different values. Residential rooftop solar provides a different value proposition than just utility scale. Just utility scale really does provide you big economies of scale and the lowest cost, but it doesn't create the jobs. It doesn't do the environmental benefits of useful, effective space, and it doesn't give you the economic stimulus that rooftop solar does. And so the good part is we don't have to choose, because the National Energy Policy says we can do consumer renewables, utility scale, electric vehicles, and energy efficiency. But that's not the regulator's position.
Mm. So if you have a house, say 2,500 square feet, say you have a roof space 2,500 square feet, or even 2,000 square feet, what would be the general price to put solar on a roof like that? And typically, what is the financing arrangements?
Yeah, so a house like that that's around 2,000 square feet, typically what we see in Cayman, those builds are somewhere around between 250 and 350. That's kind of the average we've seen for houses like that. A 5 kilowatt solar system is really what you're, looking for a house like that under the core program. That will eliminate somewhere between 80 and 90% of the bill. And something like that is going to cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of 15,000, somewhere thereabouts, a little more, a little less, depending on the quality and the type of technologies that you pick. But somewhere in that $15,000 range.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Now again, if the regulations were such that I could provide the financing, then the customers wouldn't have to pay anything.
Right.
I would say to that customer, okay, instead of you again taking, buying the system from me and getting the full, $250, I'll finance the system for you. You'll pay nothing for it. I'll install it. I'll put it up, and we'll share the savings.
Right. Okay.
But unfortunately, I can't offer that simply because I don't get paid the money from the utility. They won't do it. At least the regulations are such that they won't allow them to do it. So what happens is the customer gets the credit, and because the customer gets the credit, now you take that customer and you multiply that by thousands of customers. I have to assess the credit worthiness of each one of these customers. So I, in effect, have to become a bank. So in effect, it becomes logistically impossible for us to do it.
Right. The last time you were here, we started talking about it, and you didn't have enough time because someone switched to the other topic. But give us what do you mean by community solar? How does that work, and how does it benefit small communities or communities with small homes, etc.? Yeah.
So this is another thing that we as the association have pushed as one of the new programs, right? Community solar is done all over the world. It's done all over the world effectively. It's even done in plenty of places here in the Caribbean. And what it really means is not everybody has the ability to put solar on their roof. They don't have a strong enough house or a strong enough roof, or there are plenty of reasons why they might not be able to put solar on their roof. But that doesn't mean that you can't have solar. So I, for example, could build a 1 megawatt solar farm in a field, and you could buy 5 kilowatts of that, and you could buy 5 kilowatts of that. And the same 5 kilowatts that you would have bought to put on your roof, you aren't putting it on your roof, but you own 5 kilowatts of that system, and you're getting that $250 from that every month. So you are actually owning a piece of that solar farm. And what that does is it allows people who, for maybe financial reasons, we've gone to people's houses and looked to install solar and realize that the house isn't up to code and the roof isn't hurricane proof and all those kinds of things. Well, that's an option for somebody to invest in solar, to get a financial benefit, to reduce their electricity costs without actually having the solar physically at their house. And so that's a simplified version of it, but that's basically how it works.
Thank you. I'm sure we're going to have some discussion toward the end about your topic, but thank you very much for giving us a lot of enlightenment on that, Mr. James Whitaker. And I want to remind our listeners that you're listening to Let's Talk Policy with Mario. My name is Mario Ebanks, candidate of choice, your best choice for West Bay West on April the 14th. Now we're going to move to our second panelist tonight, Miss Catherine Wells. Catherine Wells is a native of Georgetown, or as her family would specify, Crew Road, and was born to Charlie Wells of West Bay and Christine Wells of Georgetown, and is the middle child of 3. Catherine grew up with a love of passion for learning, animals and environment, outdoor adventures with cousins, sports, community service, and working in the neighborhood. Academically, Catherine is a past alum of the International College of the Cayman Islands in February 2020 with her master's degree in human resource management. Catherine was the awardee for the most outstanding capstone project entitled External Influences, How the Cost of Living in the Cayman Islands Affects Employees' Salaries and how lowering the costs of living benefits employees and organizations. Her report was also presented and aired on Star 92.7 and other radio stations on the island. Catherine also holds a bachelor's degree in business administration with a minor in human resources management and an associate's degree in business administration from the University College of the Cayman Islands. So Catherine, welcome to the show, and you're here to talk to us tonight about your capstone thesis and about the important issue of cost of living and how it impacts us. So the floor is yours. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ebanks, for inviting me, and welcome also to my panelists, and welcome to everyone who is listening in or watching live. As you've stated, my capstone thesis was titled "How the Cost of Living in the Cayman Islands Affects Employees' Salaries and how lowering it benefits employees and organizations." The cost of living, as we all know and are affected by, is something that I'm very passionate about, and I took a different route than James did. You know, he's going into actually implementing the solutions, or one of the solutions to our cost of living issue, whereas I wanted to deep dive into what was the key factors, the key influential factors that are causing essentially the cost of living issues. And so I ended up it took me about 3 months. Which was a time limitation, and I wanted to delve into it and go through multiple facets of our economy and the country in itself to see how everything is affected as a whole. But I decided to just focus solely on the cost of living and those key factors. And as James rightly said, you know, the Cayman Islands is one of the top countries with the highest cost of living. Matter of fact, according to Altoma Corporate Services in 2017, this is when this report was run, the Cayman Islands is basically the second running. We're in the second place as the highest cost of living in the world, underneath Bermuda, and California, New York are next. So we are in second place, and that is something that we shouldn't be proud of, and is something that we should have worked harder over the years of reducing. That's not a ranking we should aim for, in my opinion. You know, being the second place, yes. That's not something we should ever aim for. So one of the top reason for the high cost of living in the Cayman Islands is fuel. Fuel is it affects absolutely every single thing in our country, and unfortunately, it's the unregulated factor in our country right now. According to my research and my interviews, I conducted a lot of interviews with some of our regulatory bodies, with other fuel experts, with multiple businesses that use fuel, including gas stations, and everyone says, and everyone can tell, it's fuel. I mean, there's nothing in our country that isn't affected by it. If you go to the store and buy a pack of batteries, you may say, well, I only had to walk up to that pack of batteries to buy it. However, it required fuel to transport it from the manufacturer to the Cayman Islands. It required fuel to get it from the port to the store. It required fuel for you or I to drive up to it, to go and buy that, and required fuel for us to drive home and use it. Everything, you know, right down to pumping air into a tire still required fuel, because at some point that item needed to be transported here with fuel. Also, it factors into our CUC prices, because that's the second area, of course, that affects each and every one of us on this island. That CUC and fuel are the two things that link each and every one of us together, even regardless of whether we have a car or not. You know, we still require fuel to take the public transport, our own transport, or even to buy a bicycle. As I said, you know, it still required fuel to get that here. So I ended up, as I said, doing a mixed method research project to find out as many things as I could about what was causing our high cost of living. The key contributing factors other than CUC and fuel were real estate property prices. And one thing I ended up learning about during this time was that the valuators from my interviewee, stated that valuators are self-regulated. So they get to choose what methods they're using to value your homes. But the thing that I found more, I guess, distressing was that they don't actually value your property based on just the value of the property and the land. They only value your property based on the selling price. So typically you and I would want a profit on whatever we're selling, the home that we're buying, so therefore the seller would mark it up, even unless, of course, it's one of those high-end homes where you go and get a valuation and say, well, I'm not paying more than this for your property. And if the person's willing to buy it and you're willing, and selling, then, and you come to that agreement, then that's the case where, okay, we all agree on the selling price is based on the valuation. So I'm finding that inflation is being caused because valuators are only valuing the selling prices and not actually, they don't have a proper method of valuing the actual property instead of what it's being sold for. Another one is there's no form of consumer price protection laws. There is one that has been drafted, I've recently learned, from the Legal Commission, and so I would like to review that, but I was trying to get to the point in my research that I could even, solicit the help of attorneys and go over it to create one. But thankfully, there's already one in existence. So hopefully, if you're voted in, you can pull that off the shelf and dust it off and implement that.
Yes, I will.
The other thing another key influential factor that I've learned through my research is in regards to our salaries. So one thing that I found out when I interviewed the Economic and Statistics Office personnel, they provide employers with the Consumer Price Index every 2 years. However, employers are not mandated to increase your salary to match the recommendations of that Consumer Price Index. It's not mandated at all. So it's just your employee salary are only adjusted based on merit and on considerations made to the cost of living adjustments. They don't have to. They're not forced to. Right. Another thing that I learned was that in most cases, unless it's a specialized job, your employer is going to aim to underpay you in the market. So they're going to always try to aim to lag in the market or not meet you halfway in the mid-range or the high range, depending on what you're going to go into, whatever job you're having. So that is the unfortunate thing. And as I said, employers aren't going to increase your salary based on the cost of living, the Consumer Price Index, which they should, because you should be able to survive based on how things are inflating. But that's not the case. So our salaries are rarely ever matching the cost of inflation. CUC is increasing your bills every single year. Your health insurance is going up every single year. So nothing is offsetting your savings. An example that I did I created a budget here. I sent the report to both of you to see. So I ended up doing a budget for someone, an anonymous person. Their gross monthly salary, for example, is $4,481.83 per month. That is before health and pension deductions. Their health and pension deductions is $444.44. Their net salary is $4,037.39. Their mortgage payments, their loans, car loans, clumped together was $2,903.39 per month, which gives them net salary of $1,134. Then comes your monthly utility bills. Their CUC monthly average is $165.74. Their water bill average is $56.44. Fuel average $100 per month. Food expense average was $250 a month, and this was back in 2019. So obviously that's a lot higher now. Their phone and internet was $199. Their life insurance policies, they were paying $113.26 CI per month. So their utilities and life insurance total was $884.44. So you minus that from their net salary of what was left, if they did not have property insurance, because I got a quote from multiple property insurance companies, and so one of them quoted me, and so I just deducted it, the 10 months that they gave. So without that property insurance, they would only have $249.56 left per month if they did not bother to implement house insurance, which if you have a mortgage, you're required property insurance. And of course, if you're a customer who's not renewing it, sometimes the banks will force coverage onto your property. Now, with their property insurance, because per month it's $545.17 per month, if they're paying monthly versus annually, they would have net $295.61. So they would be in the red per month on this salary. And please take note that this is actually a single person with no children. So there's no extra health insurance costs, there's no child care costs included in this.
Right.
So this is what many young Caymanians, single young Caymanians, have to deal with. Because this would be their average salary. Many of them are getting paid in this range, and there's no room for them to make any form of investments going forward. Even though, yes, they have a mortgage payment now, but they don't have much purchasing power left. They don't have much investment power left, if at all, in this situation. And it's only gotten worse since COVID, as we know, because prices have inflated even more due to the lack of resources and the shortage, and everyone's in need right now. So that is something that I brought to the attention of our government as well, and I was invited to a think tank in the beginning of last year to try to go over what these key issues were and how we could find the solutions. Now, it hasn't recommenced since then, because as far as I know, those who held the think tanks are now focusing on travel time and the border reopening and how we're, all of those logistics.
This is a think tank on cost of living?
Cost of living and how to find the solutions.
Okay.
So various professionals from the industry, such as valuators, myself. I was representing myself, not the companies that I worked for, but I brought in some of the knowledge that I had from where I work, as well as persons from the supermarkets, real estate agents. So different people from different aspects of our community were involved in that think tank.
Okay, that's good. We can bring that back after the election. When I'm elected, we can bring that back.
Yeah.
Make that work.
Yes, because we were getting close. We were having really good debates, and we were really deep diving into the issues and certain things that I may have not thought of. Other people were thinking, well, this is another reason why we're having this issue. Let's solve this problem. How do we do it? Well, from my expertise, this is what my industry is contributing to that problem or that solution. Yeah. So it was very interesting, and unfortunately, like I said, COVID brought it to a halt. Now, I just wanted to go into a few of the conclusions that I brought, because I didn't want to go through the whole paper.
Just the highlights,
just the conclusion and the recommendations that were made based on my findings.
From your thesis now.
Correct. Despite the fluctuations and occasional reductions in inflation in the Cayman Islands, based on the Consumer Price Index, because as you will look into the paper, or if you even look on the ESO's website, you will see that it does fluctuate from time to time. The cost of living is still rising substantially year over year, as we know, due to multiple external influences. That being the U.S.'s economy and Cayman's reliance on imports. The United States prime rate, as we know that once the U.S. drops their prime rate or raise their prime rate, we follow in suit. And that's because due to the proximity and the imports, it's not because we are politically affiliated to them, but because we are their closest trading partner, or they're our closest trading partner, we tend to peg our prime rates on their economy, as well as the largest sector of tourism comes from the U.S. So we try to stay in line. So it's not due to political affiliation, but geographical proximity that we tend to peg ourselves with the U.S. Cost of imports from the U.S. and other countries are affected by the diminishing the diminishing of natural resources and pre-made materials, higher level of competing demands by other countries, especially during active hurricane seasons and other times of natural and human man-made disasters, as we've seen. Especially last year with COVID, we had situations where masks and other Lysol, Clorox wipes, those things were in high demand, but we ran out in many cases, and then our supermarkets had to supply it from other countries, or we just didn't have it at all for a long time. Employee salaries, as I said, were not determined by the cost of living or the consumer price index, but are only done by local, regional, and global competitive analysis on what is the competitive salary for a particular job. So as I said, it's not based on our consumer price index at all. It's not based on our cost of living at all. So it's just based on what the competitors are doing locally, what it's done regionally, because obviously if you're bringing in an expat, you're trying to make it as competitive as possible to attract them to come here. And in most cases, you tend to pay them at the higher end of the market in order to get them to come. Whereas for Caymanians like ourselves, they will either maybe meet you at mid-range, but they will tend to try to lag in the market and underpay you. Employee salaries are only, as I said, adjusted on merit. And then on to the energy part, it's no other utility company on the island other than CUC is regulated in the Cayman Islands currently, which is why they're constantly allowed to go back and forth with the government and get increases on the rates. And we're like, didn't you increase that already? I mean, we're already suffering enough, why allow them to continue raising the rates? Which again makes it even harder for us, like a consumer like myself, to get solar, because what they're doing is all of our savings, all of our salary is being consumed by these monthly expenses, which doesn't allow us to save any money elsewhere, no matter how hard we try, because I'm sure people like me, we put money in a savings account, and then something happens out of the blue. It's like, oh, well, I got to dip into that again. I got to keep dipping into the savings. And we're not able to leverage that or save anything to invest in solar, which I, for one, want to do. I'm trying to do. But it's very hard. The other thing is there are no regulations or enforcement for fuel providers in the Cayman Islands. Therefore, the costs are given away to substantial inflation in prices for goods, services, and needs in the Cayman Islands. As I said, I spoke to someone who worked in the fuel industry in the gas stations. They're saying, oh, we just guesstimate. Mm-hmm. So it just doesn't seem like there's an actual method or formula that is used to give us reasonable prices in gas. They just guesstimate on what they believe that is going to be needed. I mean, in many cases, sometimes they'll tell you, oh, well, this is the price that we're charging right now. And that's because we still have a lot of fuel left in our tanks. We need to finish this off before we bring in the next load. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
So there's no, you just decided to ask for extra and overcharging us, but you're not using a proper formula.
It's called a cartel.
Yes.
I just want to ask you one question, Catherine. In your paper, you talked about reasonable price home and rental property.
Yes.
Can you talk briefly about what you found there and if you had any kind of observations or findings around what could be done about that, just as quick as you can?
Well, real estate property prices, as I said, with the valuation part of it, the selling prices are very inflationary because the properties aren't valued for the structures itself. It is valued on past selling prices of comparable properties. So the prices are being inflated dramatically and substantially, and no one is stopping them and saying you need to only charge based on what that property was actually valued.
This includes this raw land as well.
Raw land, because people are wanting a profit on
Right.
top of what they're selling. Another issue with the high levels of rents is that the value. If you look in your valuations, they will tell you what your rental value could be. Many people are going to use that estimated rental value versus say, okay, well, this is what my monthly mortgage payment is at the bank. Let me only charge this, because typically the renter is paying utilities separately, but they're doing that and marking it up. Mm-hmm. In addition, to making it even harder for us is that there's no ban on discrimination of renters. So, for example, many people I've spoken to are having issues where they can't find anywhere to rent because they have a child or a pet. So it's only people who are able to pay much higher prices that I consider extortionate that are willing to rent somewhere just because they have a child and pet. I mean, what else are you going to do? Should you abandon your child just to afford somewhere else? You can't. Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard for people to do that.
I think one of the key things you touched on is housing. It's something that I have looked at in addition to energy. So most people know me for energy, but I also have a business that focuses on sustainable housing. And so over the years, I've sort of used those two things as the areas where I want to have an impact in Cayman in terms of driving down the cost of living. And I've looked at the issue quite extensively, as I have with energy. And I came to the conclusion that for us to do truly affordable, high quality housing, and I try to break things down to its most practical sense. Any item that you want to build in this world, doesn't matter if it's a phone or that cup or that mic or that headset, how do you drive that cost down to its lowest form? You have to build that on an assembly line in large quantities. And so we had to, in my view, we have to think like that. And so, I made a proposal to one of the government departments to provide a couple of hundred homes to the NAU, fully funded, using a modular assembly line building method.
Like a precast methods? Or just building it?
Fully prefabricated,
okay.
Shipped in and assembled.
Okay.
And it's more environmentally friendly, because you're building in a continuum, there's no waste. It is far more time efficient. You're talking about building these things in 3 or 4 months, not 18 months or 2 years. And you can build hundreds of these things in just a few months. And you can do them at less than $100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so, but that takes a little out of the box thinking, and that scares people sometimes, right?
Yes.
But there are solutions to that. But you're right. I mean, housing is one of the key driving factors, housing and energy. If you can solve housing and energy, you solve 50%, 60% of the problem.
Yeah.
And you heard that right here on Let's Talk Policy with Mario. I mean, we have discussion going on tonight with Mr. James Whitaker and Ms. Catherine Wells. And we're just wrapping up the discussion with Catherine Wells now on her paper. And then we're going to move on to a couple of minutes of discussion before we wrap up. So.
Well, one quote that I just wanted to share in relation to the cost of living. I know that a lot of candidates have been saying that we need to raise a minimum wage. I do agree that if we're not going to actually get to the crux of the matter and lower the cost of living. But that's still not going to help us, because it's going to still be devoured by inflation.
Right.
And so one of the people who I've read their works and I've enjoyed reading their works, and that helped me with this paper is M. Shedlock 2013. And his quote states, and he emphasizes that lowering the cost of living is more useful than raising wages. A point that cannot be made enough, because it is a win-win solution that opponents of government austerity fail to recognize. In addition to raising the standard of living for everyone, regardless of how much or how little they make, lower prices free capital to reduce debt and invest in innovation. He writes, we do not need higher prices, we need higher wages, we need lower prices. And that brought me on to a CUC bill that I brought here. I looked at it and I looked through all the line items, and I'm realizing that we're basically reimbursing them for absolutely everything. And really and truly, we as consumers should only be paying the energy costs, but we're paying for facilities charges, energy charges, license and regulation fees, government fuel duty, which according to what I heard, they don't really pay that. Other than us, fuel costs and renewable energy costs. So those are their line items. And if you look at this bill here with me, the fuel cost alone is $301.20.
What's the total bill?
The total bill was $593.44.
Wow.
The energy cost is $231.12. The fuel cost is $301.20. So if you took off the fuel costs, which really and truly in my opinion, I don't believe any consumer should be paying. We should only be paying for the energy itself that we're using. You would cut that bill in half.
Before we switch to James for a couple of comments, we're going to have to start winding up. But Catherine, I want to invite you to join the Council of Advisors and this think tank, because you have a lot of information, a lot of research, and you're brilliant young Caymanian, and you've done a fantastic job with your paper. One of the comments, or one of the quotes that I saw in your preface to your paper, and I'll just read it as you wrote it. It says, "A humble reminder that all is still not well at home. Lives are still being negatively impacted despite the smiles on the surface, but the constant struggle to make do with what we have underneath the surface, and despite what any economic performance report may state." So you're saying in this letter which went along with your report was things are not well at home. There's issues that we got to deal with. Things might look good, but we need to look at not just quantity but quality.
Correct.
And so, James, that you have any other comments that you want to make general before we start wrap?
Yeah, I actually wanted to comment on Catherine's last comment there, and it's something that I have looked at obviously for many years, and to defend CUC a little bit, not that I defend CUC too much, but CUC is to be fair to them, they're a private company that at the end of the day looks out for their shareholders.
Their interests and their shareholders. Yes.
And so as somebody coming from the private sector, I really don't begrudge them at all. Most of my ire, as you can tell, is for the regulatory part of that, which are the people's representatives who are paid by the people to represent our interests. But I only say all that to say that the energy portion can't happen without the fuel portion.
No, that's correct.
Right?
Yeah, understood.
So the real issue, in my personal view, is that, and this is not something unique to Cayman, CUC, like many utilities, and this is just a general utility mindset, is cover all my costs and then give me my profit on top of that. Right. Whatever my costs are, I need you to indemnify all of that, and I'll make all of these big capital investments, and then I want my 7, 8, 10%, whatever it is after that.
Right.
Well, that's a sweet deal to get if you can get it, and luckily for a lot of the monopoly utilities, they have that.
Yeah.
I think where countries make the mistake is that they allow the fuel cost to be purely borne by the consumer.
Yes.
If utilities had to bear the volatility of that fuel cost, first thing they'll say, well, energy would cost more. Well, what would actually happen is that they would make sure that they mitigated that volatility. Exactly. And what you would see happen is that they wouldn't rely on diesel fuel as much, and they wouldn't be as slow to transition to renewable energy. Now, they'll probably tell you, yeah, well, we would like to transition to renewable energy quicker because off-reg won't allow us to do it. But the point is, if the consumers didn't have to take all of that risk and the utilities had to take that risk, you'd find utilities transitioning way faster than they are.
Which was the next point I was going to make, but thank you for making it for me.
Yes. I just want to thank both of you for this very enlightening discussion and beneficial discussion on Let's Talk Policy with Mario. And I want to just remind our listeners that it is important for policies and programs to be discussed in the elections. And our campaign endeavors to do so. We discuss issues, we talk about ideas and solutions, and a better vision for these islands. So tonight's show, listeners, gave us a little glimpse on these two important topics. And I thank again Catherine Wells and Mr. James Whitaker for being here and for bringing your intellectual capital to the forefront. And it also gives us a glimpse of how I plan to govern when, God willing, I'm elected on 14th of April, where I'm going to reach out and embrace talent and ideas. And working together, we can benefit all of the people of these beloved Cayman Islands. I also want to remind all the voters of your solemn obligation and democratic right to vote, and also to be ethical voters. Treating is something that is a crime under the elections law, and has serious penalties under the law for offences in treating. Treating is basically when you receive or give money or favours to get votes. And I want to remind all of our listeners and our candidates and voters that the Anti-Corruption Commission and the Cayman Islands Police have a special branch dealing with these issues. And I also invite the public and their listeners and viewers to visit our website, which is Mario 4 www.wbw.com, where you'll get a link to the Anti-Corruption Commission website, which you will find very, very interesting. I also want to thank all those people who are going to enjoy Easter, and say to those who cannot access the public beach on the West Bay Beach, they cannot access that camping ground that they're supposed to have near the Kimpton, that you can thank my opponent for that, because he's the one that gave away and closed the roads and the beaches for those who want to go camping in West Bay. But despite that, this is Holy Week. Everyone have a blessed, happy Easter and safe one. Remember, the reason for the season of Easter is to reflect on and appreciate the passion of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Thank you all very much. Have a good night. God bless you all. And thank you again to Catherine and James. Good night. God bless.
You're welcome.